First today, a condition that might be linked to the mind wandering off and doing its own thing. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, tends to be characterised by difficulties in concentrating, impulsivity and hyperactivity. But could excessive mind wandering be at its core? Here are two teenage girls we'll call Talia and Josie, not their real names, speaking to their coach from ADHD Richmond, Val Ivens, while she notes down their thoughts on a flip chart.
What sort of things happen when your mind's wandering?
I like to daydream.
And where do you go in your head?
I like planning what I'm going to do when I'm not at school.
Anything else?
I like fiddling. In my pencil case I have loads of smelly pens, and they're really nice to smell, like, in your lessons.
Okay, so smelly pans. So lots of good sensory stuff then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what's going on in your head when that happens?
I just focus on that, and I just try to block out everything else.
Okay. So it helps you, actually. It's more like a strategy. By focusing on that, you can block out other things.
Mm-hmm.
Almost blocking out the thoughts in your head, or not so much?
Blocking out everything that's going on around me.
Okay.
Because I don't understand what the teacher is saying. I don't understand the work because I didn't listen, because I couldn't, because I was smelling pens.
I tend to daydream more of I've got loads and loads of stories that I like to think of, and I like to elaborate on them inside my head. Well, the stories I have in my head are generally about fantasy, fiction, and sort of children of magical creatures. I don't really know.
She's a dancer, she's a writer, sportsman. He definitely does, because all these other people have talked openly about it.
Philip Asherson is showing me pictures of famous, successful people thought to have ADHD. He's Professor of Clinical and Molecular Psychiatry at King's College London and a consultant at the Maudsley Hospital in London. For the first time, the idea that mind wandering might play a big part in ADHD is being taken seriously, and he's getting invited to speak about it around the world.
What really characterises ADHD is just the inability or the difficulty in focusing on something you're meant to be doing, and you just can't stop this kind of background mind wandering.
So it's kind of happening without you being able to control it at all. It's just
you can't control
all over
it.
the place. What
and
sort of
people
things do people
talk
say?
about it being very intrusive, a cacophony of thoughts going on, background chatter, almost like a whirlwind just going on in your mind. And it can be very distressing for people because it's like this constant mental activity and often multiple thoughts all at the same time. And so people find that really exhausting, and then to sort of switch that off, to turn this down so they can actually focus on something takes a huge amount of effort. And so a lot of people with ADHD then feel sort of exhausted and drained by the effort of trying to focus and switch off this background noise.
So would you see ADHD as more of a condition of excessive mind wandering than the way it's usually characterised in terms of inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity?
So I suppose at this point it's more of a hypothesis, but it's based very much on the experience of people with ADHD, that sort of mind wandering in itself is a core problem in ADHD and is perhaps leading to the behavioural problems that we use to define the diagnosis. So inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, being forgetful, not finishing tasks, sort of losing track during a conversation, quite behavioural. They're more about the kind of consequences of some underlying process. So it may well be a better way of defining the diagnosis. And in terms of trying to understand what causes ADHD, it may be a much better thing to focus on from a scientific point of view.
And because that does look a little bit like anxiety or excessive worrying, can that make it hard to diagnose?
I think it often leads to misdiagnosis, but I think a lot of that is because still many people, including healthcare professionals, are not familiar with ADHD.
Teachers don't understand what ADHD is. Literally, like, I don't know if it's just at my school, but some of them are so rude. They get really, annoyed. I don't ask them, to repeat anything if I don't understand it in a lesson.
I feel the majority of my teachers in the school have been quite well briefed on it, and they really do understand. They will repeat things for me. But sometimes they're more accustomed to different ways of seeing ADHD. They don't really understand your specific version, I guess.
But if you talk to people who've worked a lot with people with ADHD, there is actually quite a strong consensus on what ADHD is and what it looks like.
And what about when it comes to looking at the neural activity? Can you see any difference in the people with ADHD that would suggest there's more mind wandering going on?
But there are certain clues that mind wandering could really be core to ADHD. And one of those findings is that mind wandering in itself is linked to what's called default mode network activity. And this is a neural network which is very active when you're resting and when your mind is wandering. And there's now been a lot of research in healthy people to show that when your mind wanders, the default mode network is set very high. But when you focus on a task and your mind wandering reduces, the default mode network deactivates. And so that's a normal process. And in ADHD, we know that people have problem in deactivating the default mode. So even when they're trying to focus on a task, they can't switch that background neural activity off. And so we're testing the hypothesis that because the default mode network is stuck high, that's causing this background noise, this background chatter in your head, and that's causing the problems that we call ADHD.
Does everyone with ADHD experience excessive mind wandering?
I think almost everybody, and it's hard to answer that question, but it does seem that the majority, probably 80% or more of people with ADHD do describe this type of mind wandering. So interestingly, there are probably two main ways that we know that you can reduce mind wandering in ADHD. One is with medication, but another is by engaging in tasks that are very interesting and very stimulating. And they're stimulating enough to grab the attention of somebody with ADHD. And of course, once their attention is grabbed, like with anyone else, the mind wandering actually does decrease.
Recently at school, my medication's been helping me concentrate. I had my mocks yesterday, and just being able to focus through the whole exam and just listening, and it just helps. And
what helps me concentrate is again my medication, but also when I enjoy a subject and especially one-to-one sessions. I like being able to have focus when you like something. You can get yourself doing something nice for a very long period of time.
Are there any ways that you could teach people to control their mind wandering, apart from finding something they can really focus on like that?
One idea is that mindfulness-based interventions, like kind of meditation-based treatments, could be very useful in ADHD.
Because you might be teaching them to learn to quieten the mind.
Well, essentially, you're noticing that your mind does wander off. So the first thing is you're actually learning that that's what your mind does. We also know from neuroscience studies that meditation itself seems to target and improve the regulation of this, the down-regulation of the default mode network is improved by meditation in normal people, healthy people. And so it may also have that impact in ADHD. And there have been a series of quite interesting clinical trials of mindfulness in ADHD, and the results look really quite interesting.
So do you think this might get taken further then, the idea that mind wandering might be at the core? What sort of reaction have you had to this from other people in the field?
An extremely positive one. People can sort of see the logic that it seems to tap into some new aspects of the neuroscience that we're now learning about ADHD. And people recognise that mind wandering is part of the clinical syndrome. So it's an area where there's not yet been enough research, but I think there's a lot of interest in this, yes.
If you had a chance to, in 5 years' time, to say to your teachers, but you didn't understand this or you didn't understand that, what would the message be to the teachers based on what you've experienced at school?
I think as long as people understand when you can listen and when you can't, and that sometimes you just can't listen, instead of just assuming you're trying to be rude.
Go back to school and learn what other people have to go through, and sort out your attitude as well.